afternoon, everyone. Caresoft would like to welcome you to the Vizeta webcast, an innovative approach for tackling the FedRAMP authorization process. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. The audio portion of this webcast can be heard through your computer speakers, or if you prefer, you can use the dial-in displayed on the screen to listen through your telephone. Please note that all lines have been muted to reduce any background noise. If you have any questions throughout the webcast, please use the Q&A pod on the left side of your screen, and we will answer at the end of the presentation. Just to tell you a little bit about Caresoft, we are a trusted government and commercial IT solutions provider delivering software and support solutions to commercial, federal, state, and local government agencies. Caresoft maintains dedicated teams to support sales and marketing for all of its vendors. Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation, so please do not hesitate to call or email us for any of your needs. This webcast is being recorded, and a copy will be emailed to you. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day, Jim Mangus, Director of Federal Programs at Vizeta. Jim, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Olivia. Appreciate it very much. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Let's talk about FedRAMP and kind of how to get there if you're not already there, or kind of anything in between. So let's dive in here a little bit. I want to start out with just kind of giving you a little history about who Vizeta is. We started back around the year 2000, and we're a managed services, hosting, cloud company, as well as co-location and a host of services. We serve everything from small, medium, mid-market companies, Global 1000, and of course state and federal agencies. We provide secure, stable, scalable, which is a big plus, scalable technology solutions that meet our customers' requirements for what they have going on today, as well as what their roadmap looks like for the future. We have 2 FedRAMP cloud nodes, one in Northern Virginia and the other in the Dallas, Texas area, which is where we're headquartered. We're in McKinney, Texas, which is on the north end of the Dallas area, if you're familiar with Dallas. And we also have enterprise, commercial class cloud infrastructure in the same locations. We also have 5 data centers, 1 in Northern Virginia and then 4 in the North Texas area. We do solutions such as infrastructure as a service, managed services, managed backup, disaster recovery as a service, and anything that really kind of has to do with supporting IT infrastructure. And let's see, our targeted verticals that we kind of focus on. Of course, public sector is near and dear to my heart because that's what we'll be speaking about today. Healthcare, finance, retail solutions, manufacturing, and of course, other high technology companies. So moving on, this is going to give us a little idea of what we're going to kind of go through today. Going to run through a little bit of an introduction, and then we're going to talk about FedRAMP. Why would you want to go through FedRAMP, and why is now something that you're looking at doing, in a public sector focus? And we can go through a couple of things where I can kind of allude to why now would be the time if you were going to make that jump. We're going to talk about kind of who we are from a platform perspective or infrastructure perspective, and then how it is that we can work with what we call ISVs, software vendors, security vendors, et cetera, to go through that FedRAMP ATO process yourself and how we can help you get there. And then we'll go through a little bit of Q&A session and wrap it up. So without further ado, we'll jump in. And I do have to kind of backtrack for a second because I would be remiss in not introducing another team member of mine that will be in the Q&A session at the back of the presentation. And he is our Senior Vice President of compliance, and all things federal in terms of FedRAMP, and that is Jeff Lietzo. And he'll be joining us and helping answer those tough questions that I'm sure that you're going to throw at us. All right, so let's jump into the intro here. For those that don't already know what FedRAMP is, and there might be some out there, FedRAMP is government-wide from a federal perspective that is really designed to give a standardized approach to security focused really around cloud. FISMA came out with a kind of a cloud controls framework that actually we had gone through back in like the 2010, 2011 timeframe. And then 2012 came around and FedRAMP was released because the federal government really kind of looked at it and thought, you know, maybe this isn't giving us all we need in terms of a tight security framework around what cloud is bringing to the table these days. So FedRAMP was created to focus exclusively on cloud. Now this process is a pretty complex process. It's lengthy. It's well documented in terms of templates, et cetera. However, it can still be extremely confusing and difficult to comprehend for those that may not be working that Fed space compliance piece on a daily basis. Even if you are, it can still be a challenging endeavor. And now all cloud service providers now have to be aware that there are streamlined processes in place today because of some issues around the traditional path to a JAB ATO through FedRAMP. There were complaints that it was taking too long, that it was too expensive, that it was really kind of a hindrance to small businesses that wanted to play in that federal cloud market. So GSA came out with something they released back in March of last year called FedRAMP Accelerated, or some call it FedRAMP Ready. Now, looking at getting your cloud solution or your SaaS or PaaS solution through the ATO process and actually coming out the other side with a JAB ATO, it's still going to take a significant commitment in both time and resources, finances. Now, the estimates about what that means and what time frame looks like and what the finances required to get through vary widely, just because some applications, like say a software application, may not be as complex as others. The infrastructure piece is at least kind of what it is, regardless of who you go through. There's that piece of it. So a software or someone that wants to create a platform as a service will technically, for the most part, ride on someone that already has their infrastructure as a service JAB ATO. But the applications and the platforms vary, so it's hard to figure out what a true cost looks like for really the kind of mainstream CSP that wants to go through. Timing is different because it really depends on how far along in the process you already are. If you're starting from scratch, then that time frame will be much longer, and you will incur, of course, more expenses. However, we're here to talk to you about how to get through that and how to, number one, minimize that time, and then number two, minimize the expenses that it's going to take to kind of help get you through that. All right, so why would you want to go through FedRAMP? If you're considering selling into the federal space and you are an infrastructure as a service provider, or you have a software application that maybe you sell today to some federal customers, however, they're being pushed to start looking more towards cloud, and they're pushing you to become FedRAMP compliant so they can buy your application in a manner that's going to, number one, help them with checking off the block for cloud first, and then number two, make it an easier consumption model. And then of course now, why is now the time to actually go through this? And here are some good points that we're going to kind of run through that'll talk about why now is a good time. So the 2016, fiscal year 2016, cloud computing spending is estimated to be between $6 and $9 billion, which is no bit of chump change. And estimates for the next year or several years put that into double-digit billions, upwards of 20 plus. 1.6 billion of what was contracted for cloud spend across 19 of the agencies, and those were larger agencies. That 1.6 billion is not in compliance with FedRAMP standards. So just as on the commercial side, we hear this term called shadow IT, with people or departments jumping into public cloud environments to spin up a few servers here or there for whatever's required, running outside that typical IT procurement infrastructure. They have shadow IT on the commercial side, and now we also have shadow cloud, or really shadow IT on the government side. The compounded annual growth rate for cloud spending is estimated to be between 15 and 18%. So that means it's not going away; it's only growing. And if we look at a annual federal IT budget of roughly $80 billion, that cloud spend is going to continue to go up. The federal government's Cloud First initiative really kind of has a mandate on agencies to have to justify why they would not use cloud and why they would go invest in new infrastructure or new technology or new applications that aren't in the cloud or the federal mandated FedRAMP cloud environment. Let's see, and of course, GSA is always looking for ways to leverage applications more for like back office type scenarios, whether it be email or HR type applications, or the ever popular acquisitions, which we all have to play in if we're going to try to sell our goods or services to the federal government. And of course, other IT shared services. So everybody is looking towards expanding that presence in the federal space, and it's being driven by a couple of key organizations like Office of Management and Budget, the GSA, and then a couple others that really are kind of focused in that FedRAMP space, like Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and NIST, and a couple others. And then all of the federal CIOs are engaged in this endeavor to some degree. So it's certainly not something that they're taking lightly. As we kind of get further into this, the OMB is now going back to agencies, all of them, and saying, what are you putting in the cloud? So they're asking you what application or what services, what, if anything, are you putting in the cloud? And too many of the organizations to this day still haven't put anything in the cloud. So they need to check that block, and they're continually being asked, what are you doing? And they're going to be forced at some point to start putting more things in there. So out of the 440 federal departments, agencies, sub-agencies, et cetera, the larger of those are participating to some degree within the cloud space, whether it's say picking up an application as a service like Salesforce, or they're pushing their email to the cloud, or whatever the case is, they're dabbling in cloud. Now, roughly 60% of the smaller, medium-sized agencies haven't done a thing around cloud. So that is fertile hunting ground, which means there is a lot of room to grow, whether you're an infrastructure as a service provider or you're pushing a software application, whether it's some kind of a useful application like, say, around ITSM, or let's say it's focused on security, which is, of course, a hot topic these days. There is a tremendous amount of room to play in that space. Okay, so to continue on, the 80% of last year's IT budget of $80 billion was spent still on legacy infrastructure and support. And of course, GSA and FedRAMP specifically is looking to change that. As the agencies modernize, they're of course looking to push where they trust, of course. I mean, there's still a trust factor in the federal government. It's that whole FUD factor, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around, if I push this to the cloud, is it going to work? Is it going to put me in a risky situation, or is it all going to be good? That's why I think a lot of these guys are going with more of that low-hanging fruit, maybe a smaller app, or something that might not necessarily be mission critical. That's why you look at Salesforce as being a hot commodity, because if their Salesforce instance went down, it's not going to cripple their mission. But as we get more comfortable in the federal space with cloud and all of the things that it does offer around infrastructure or applications or platform opportunities, then we will start to see more of that start to get eaten away. So the estimate is that we're going to be topping $25 billion in cloud-related solutions and contracts here on the next few years. Now, the budget around security is escalating, and the reason we see that is we all know that the DNC was hacked and emails were released. That was big, but not as big as if you remember a few years ago when OPM was hacked. We have over 20,000 of our people from requiring security clearances, having their information stolen, and that includes social security numbers, fingerprints, contacts. It talks about who your college roommate was, or who your next door neighbor or neighbor across the street is. It gives all kinds of information. That was a massive hack. And as those things become more prevalent, then security providers are being looked at more because they bring expertise to the table that the federal government doesn't necessarily possess today. And the estimated budget for security over I think last year is $36 billion. Even President Trump just signed an executive order kind of mandating focusing more on our cybersecurity capabilities. And then, all things around security focused in cloud or big data, infrastructure, what have you, are currently experiencing double-digit growth, which is not just the federal community, but it's also the commercial space. And then, we're looking at things like improved monitoring, compliance, boundary and endpoint protection, effectiveness and automation, et cetera, that are craved by the federal agencies today, and they don't necessarily have the in-house expertise to make that happen. So a lot of that work is being outsourced. And some of you may actually be receiving some of those contracts. But the complexity around that cybersecurity landscape in the federal government has them looking for more assistance, more expertise from private industry, and that's where we come in. Okay, so what do we have to offer here at Fazeda that can help you kind of get through that ATO process? We have our JAB provisional ATO that we got in January of 2016. Kratos Secure Info was our third-party assessor that ultimately had tested our stuff and kind of pushed that through the JAB. We are currently at the moderate level, and our controls are identical for both of our nodes, and both are completely operational 24/7, 365. Now, the thing that makes us a little unique in regards to a few of our competitors is that we are OS agnostic, which means we're going to provide a resource pool to accommodate whatever the application requires. So if it's a Windows OSs, great. If it's various versions of Linux or Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, Debian, whatever the case may be, you are most certainly free to bring your own operating system, and you can create that infrastructure to whatever you need to run, and of course provide services around your application. We are VMware based, and when we deliver services, it really is like a virtual private data center. We're going to provide the compute power you need, memory, storage, bandwidth requirements, etc., and you're able to create that environment to suit your needs, requirements, etc. All right, so we are current with the most current revision, FedRAMP/NIST, which is revision 4, and our infrastructure, sometimes called platform, but it's not technically platform, but it was built on the same expertise that we've enjoyed in terms of selling commercial cloud, private cloud services for a lot of years now. Now, as we work to kind of push a software or security vendor through the process to become a SaaS ATO holder, our engineering and compliance team will work hand in hand with the partners team to kind of design and create that full solution riding on top of our FedRAMP infrastructure as a service, where you really inherit all of our security controls and our proven continuous monitoring and testing capabilities, et cetera, to kind of get you most of the way there. So our piece has already kind of been done, which means that moving you through is going to, number one, take us less time, and hopefully with that means less cost for the software provider, and kind of get that done in a more expeditious manner. We've already accomplished the heaviest piece, which is getting that infrastructure as a service through and getting that JAB ATO. So being able to add additional software or additional things to create a platform will really help us fast track getting through that process. Okay, so like I mentioned, the FedRAMP came out early in 2016 with what they call FedRAMP Accelerated. And it was to kind of put a revision around the original process that they were getting so many complaints about to Congress because of the time it takes to get through it, and of course the cost that it took to get through that process. Even GSA, this is based on figures from the original process. There were vendors that were going through, more than likely they were software as a service vendors, but getting through the process for as little as $500,000 to well over $4 million, which of course is going to include your infrastructure costs, et cetera, to kind of build everything from scratch, let's say. And the timeline was taking upwards of several years. And a lot of that was due to the fact that the GSA FedRAMP team is finite. There's only so many people. There's only so much that they're able to do from a work perspective to get companies through that process. So they came up with FedRAMP Accelerated, which even if you look at the GSA FedRAMP website, it talks about how the timeline to get through is significantly shorter, and with that, they're kind of assuming that the price tag to get through that then is also much less. So FedRAMP Accelerated kind of breaks down into 3 phases, which is the FedRAMP Readiness Assessment, and then the Cloud Service Provider Security Package Development, and then the Joint Authorization Board authorization process. And we're going to kind of look at a graphic here. So the only piece that the FedRAMP team is really kind of saying that they're responsible for at this point is, I mean, there are little certain nuances in there that in phase 1 and 2 that they're involved, absolutely. But the piece that you're depending upon the FedRAMP team to accomplish, along with the Joint Authorization Board. So the Joint Authorization Board is kind of broken, or it's actually comprised of 3 different agencies. One is GSA, another is Homeland Security, and then the third is Department of Defense. So it's those 3 organizations together that form the JAB, and it's those 3 that have to come together to do that final review process to kind of say whether you, yes or no, get your ATO. Now, they've revamped the process a little bit, so to speak, but it doesn't necessarily take away the things that have to be accomplished prior to the package going up to the JAB. So they've kind of backed it up a little bit. In the old days, you had to create all of your security documentation, your system security plan, your SST, your security assessment plan, SAP, security assessment report, SAR, along with a whole host of other things, and had to submit that kind of up front. And then that's what was kind of assessed, tested, et cetera. So what they looked at is that, all right, so we can kind of shorten this process up a little bit and kind of give the CSP at least an idea on the front end if, number one, that they're, in terms of where they are today, are they a candidate to go through the FedRAMP ATO process, or do they need a lot of work to do and maybe they should, kind of circle the wagons and let's button this piece up on the front end, and then let's take a look at it after that and figure out if you're ready to go FedRAMP. Now, so what that means is that the third-party assessor now comes in and does a readiness assessment report, a RAR, but that's going to have to look at your application or your infrastructure or your platform, which is at that point supposed to be operational. You're supposed to have all of your operational security capabilities squared away. You're supposed to kind of still have some security documentation put together, because without that, the 3PAO is going to have a pretty hard time completing the readiness assessment report. So while requirements from a FedRAMP perspective aren't stating specifically that you have to have all of those things, But to complete the readiness assessment report, you kind of have to have those things. So it's still incumbent upon the CSP and either their advisor, consultant, or the 3PAO that they bring in to be one of those, because a 3PAO can act in the capacity of a consultant or an advisor, but that same 3PAO cannot be the one now to assess your infrastructure. There's a conflict of interest there. So, but the CSP would typically bring somebody in to do much of that heavy lifting around creating that documentation. So it still kind of has to be done, which is why we're going to see here at the very bottom is you're going to see that it is CSP driven, which means it's incumbent upon the CSP to get all of those things taken care of to be able to move into that phase where the 3PAO that's doing an assessment is going to look at your infrastructure, your application, whatever, and they're going to say, yep, looks good to me. You guys are ready to go to the next level, which means you're FedRAMP ready. Now, once you're FedRAMP ready, you're able to get your company's name posted on the FedRAMP GSA marketplace, shows that you're FedRAMP ready, and it also shows that you are at that point capable to chase down deals, contracts in the federal space, and work through it at that point. Many of those contracts are going to tell you that, you know, to be a winner on this contract, you have to provide this FedRAMP service within the first 12 months after contract award. So you are able to go start looking at opportunities once you become FedRAMP ready. So now we look at the second phase, which is actually your security package development. Now, that's the phase where you're supposed to be developing the things like your SSP, your SAP, your SAR, your plan of action and milestones on the things that the first 3PAO that did your readiness assessment identified that might be shortcomings of your solution. So you put those in the POAM, and you've got to kind of have a process in place to start correcting those deficiencies. But this phase, while they say you didn't need necessarily that documentation in phase one, you really kind of almost did. So the second phase, you would kind of anticipate being a little bit shorter, but it's still driven by your application, the infrastructure it's riding on, and the security controls and documentation around and the boundary around that solution. And then now we go to the JAB process itself, and before getting into here, now they've said that you've gone from FedRAMP ready to in process. And you can see these broken down if you go to the GSA FedRAMP marketplace. You can filter by companies that are FedRAMP ready, the FedRAMP in process, or FedRAMP authorized, which is actually having your ATO. So this is JAB driven, and they say that they will get this done in less than 6 months. Some, of course, are going to take a shorter period of time. A less complex application may run through in a couple of months, may run through in 4 to 6 weeks. But they're going to give us a kind of a 6-month, kind of a high-end window. But you've got to add that 6 months to the time that it's taken us on phases 1 and 2 to kind of get everything put together. So that's kind of how we're going to kind of come up with, you know, a total timeline. All right, so let's look at the investment. And this is from Coalfire, who is arguably the largest and, of course, probably the most experienced in getting companies either through FedRAMP the first time or on subsequent ATOs. And these are figures that range from what, 25 to 40,000 bucks for kind of a compliance review, a gap analysis, kind of figure out where you are, where your shortcomings are, how do we kind of figure out where you sit in the mix. And then, you know, the preparation support, which is around your readiness assessment piece, Now that depends. It's a pretty big window, but that could actually be in the midpoint. It could be higher. It's just hard to say because of needing to kind of do that gap analysis and figure out where that company stands and how much that level of effort is going to be to move on. And then, of course, there's the review around the readiness, and then moving on for the next assessment. And then there's a piece that a lot of people don't necessarily think about as much, and that's the continuous monitoring that has to take place on a monthly basis. The scans have to be done to the environment, reports have to be submitted, and any deficiencies on the POAM have to be project managed and corrected along the way. So there's a cost associated with that a lot of folks just don't necessarily think about when we're kind of talking about getting through the process. And then, of course, there's another hickey that people don't necessarily think about, and it's that there's an annual recert requirement where the JAB is going to test, or a 3PAO is going to actually test a minimum of a third of your controls. So you're looking at least, on an average scale, we'll say $145,000 to $150,000. Now, if NIST, and of course, as an extension of that FedRAMP, decide that we're at Rev 4 today, we're going to go to Rev 5, a lot of that will probably take place and be audited or assessed in one of these annual assessments. And the cost will be kind of added to what would be kind of looked at as your normal annual assessment. So those costs can fluctuate up, and of course, if nothing really changes, then it may go down. However, as we look at these numbers, they're really estimates. It's from one 3PAO, but I would argue that these guys are probably more of the kind of de facto experts than we might look at from others. They don't include any engineering costs on the part of the provider in either addressing technical changes or doing anything else that kind of has to take place around creating this to be FedRAMP ready. It doesn't include anything around the underlying infrastructure, whether that be inheriting the infrastructure as a service from a JAB ATO holder or creating it from from scratch on your own. And then, of course, the industry estimates for getting the ATO range to, from roughly $500,000, and that's probably for a very simplistic software application to, well over several million, which of course can be from, building an infrastructure as a service solution from scratch. Even the GSA today is still going to tell you that it's going to cost you at least $1 million. Now, so you look at that and you're looking at having to write some pretty substantial checks, which brings us to how we approach helping customers get through that ATO process. So I kind of put together a few items here that'll kind of walk us through this. Vizeta then becomes your consulting partner. We still have to get the 3PAOs to do the mandatory assessments. However, as a consulting partner and utilizing our infrastructure, we are able to substantially lower the complexity around navigating that infrastructure because we built it, we're in it every day, we know what it's all about. So being able to document that and of course include the software or whatever's coming in there to become a platform makes that just a whole lot easier for us because we're already there. And then we can help with the package creation around creating the security controls or adhering to the security controls as outlined in the documentation, and making everything look very 3PAO ready. So when the 3PAO comes in to assess, then it's closer to a rubber stamp check the block, because everything looks almost exactly as it would look if they created it. So their piece has to be engaged for sure, but we can help minimize the time that they're actually on station. Our compliance team will work with the software platform vendor to implement changes, updates, anything that would be required to be addressed by the FedRAMP people. And then, of course, once the JAB ATO has been granted for the SAS or PASS, our compliance team will provide that monthly support, project management, oversight, and work through the continuous monitoring, the vulnerability scans, managing that POAM, and helping chip away at those deficiencies that need to be addressed. And our team will also engage on an annual basis then with that third-party assessor that has to come in and audit and assess, do testing, et cetera, around a minimum of a third of those control objectives. So all of that, instead of paying for large spikes and large chunks at various points throughout that initial process and annual process, Vizeta is able to handle in more of what we call as a FedRAMP as a service sort of way, which is kind of managed in more of an OpEx fashion versus stroking those big checks. And I've got a graphic here that's just kind of give you a picture of what you could kind of assume to be from an estimated average perspective. So you'll see in the blue a consistent monthly spend, which is easier to say budget for and account for, versus looking at when the 3PAO comes in and you kind of get to different points in that engagement and you're being asked to stroke some pretty substantial checks along the way, and those are a little bit harder to budget for and a little bit harder to maybe go to the board and ask for that funding. This way, it's a little bit more manageable. It's kind of something that you can foresee over the course of the term, and it's not an up or down spiky kind of a scenario. Now, of course, this is like any weight loss program. Your results may vary, right? So these numbers that you look, and if you look in that left column, those are by no means what I'm telling you that we can do this for. Those are an example based on the midpoint on the coal-fired numbers that they put in to their formula. This, whether it's Nutrisystems or Weight Watchers, your individual results will vary based on the complexity of your environment and what you're looking to accomplish. So really kind of take us to the end here. FedRAMP, without a doubt, is a highly complex and costly endeavor to undergo to be able to play in that federal space. And make no mistake about it, if you're a software provider or you want to offer cloud services of one flavor or another to the federal government, you will either have to go through the FedRAMP process yourself, and that is whether it's a JAB ATO or an agency ATO. Now, to kind of highlight that a little bit, the FedRAMP just held or just released the numbers from a program that they're initiating called FedRAMP Connect, and that's their way of kind of whittling down the huge number of companies that are pounding on them to get in the door. They're looking at it from a kind of a holistic aspect, and they're saying, all right, twice a year now, we're going to look at, let's say, 40 of you. And you have to present, if you're one of the 40, you present to the JAB and you say, this is us, this is who we are, and here's some of the customers that we're currently doing business with, and here's a couple of customers that want to do business with us, and they want to do it in a cloud fashion. And then they're going to go and convene, and they're going to figure out who they're going to select in that process. And they recently released a list of 7. So they're going to do this twice a year now, so it's not hard to figure out how many they're really going to push through that process. 7. And 5 out of those 7 already have agency ATOs, which means they're already part of the way through the process. And in some cases, most of the way through the process. So getting them through JAB will be a much simpler process for them than it would be to take a company that is coming in from scratch off the street saying, I want to play in that FedRAMP cloud thing you guys have going on. So FedRAMP is looking, and the JAB is looking for easy wins. How do we get through more people to appease industry as well as appease Congress in that we're doing our job, we're putting more companies through, and we're figuring out better ways to make that happen. They're going to do the easiest course of action possible to make those numbers jive, at least in the near term. The advantage that running with a company like Vizeta has is that we've already been through that process. We already have our ATO, and it's a simpler process for the JAB to look at us coming through with somebody bolted on in either a software or a platform fashion and moving us through that process as well. So we become kind of an easier feather in their cap, so to speak, than trying to push through 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 others that are coming in fresh to say, hey, we want to play in that. So that's where the advantage comes in. One of the advantages, of course. The other advantage is how you pay for it. And another advantage is the fact that we've already been there, done that, and have that consulting expertise to help you get through it. So Vizeta is, without a doubt, probably one of your better options to kind of get through and get your JAB ATO. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and give it a wrap, and let's see what kind of questions that we might have coming in.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. At this time, the floor is open for any questions. If you would like to submit a question, just type it into the Q&A pod. What does Vizeta provide that we couldn't get from someone like AWS or Azure?
That's a great question. Thank you, Olivia. Yeah, so AWS and Azure and others currently have their JAB ATO, absolutely, and they will most certainly entertain any company that wants to ride on their infrastructure to go through that process. Now, the one thing that they will provide you is their system security plan with all of their documentation. What they won't provide you is the expertise to help you get through that process. So they will provide the documentation that you require. However, they won't get you anything other than that. They'll pretty much point you to a third-party assessor and say, absolutely, use these guys to be your consultant to help you craft your particular solution, and you are absolutely free to run through the FedRAMP process. Good luck. Have a nice day. The other thing that you'll get from us that you won't get from either AWS or Azure is a VMware infrastructure that can be customized to suit the requirements of your particular application.
Great. Another one came through. We're already deployed on AWS, so how long would it take to get FedRAMP certified with your guidance?
Absolutely. Another great question. Thank you. So it's number one going to depend on which AWS platform you're currently residing on. The only AWS platform that currently has a JAB ATO is AWS GovCloud. Now the US East-West zones are agency authorized through FedRAMP. They do not have a JAB ATO. So you would not be able to take your application that is running on an AWS East or West infrastructure and go through a JAB ATO process, because that underlying infrastructure is not ATO'd through the JAB. Now, if you're already on AWS GovCloud, then we could refine that number and get that kind of worked through that piece that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, that gap analysis. If we can work with your team to kind of look and see where you are today, we can certainly give you a better estimate on what that would look like.
Great. Thank you, Jim and Jeff. I think we're still waiting for a couple more questions to come through. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A pod on the left. But I will turn to this last screen that has Catalina King's information, who is our Caresoft rep here, and also Jim's information. If you wanted to reach out to them personally to request more information, please feel free to copy down their information.
Perfect. And Jeff, since you are most certainly my compliance expert in all things FedRAMP, are there any things that you'd like to kind of add to the audience that I may have either missed or you think would be important to add?
Well, thank you, Jim. The only other item that I would really put in is a little more stress on the continuous monitoring after the fact. After you get the JAB and get your PATO, the efforts involved in that are fairly intense. A great example, the ransomware that's going around the world right now. I've been in contact with the GSA on a daily basis to ensure and report to them our infrastructure and everything we've done to ensure that we cannot be affected by this ransomware. And that's part of that project management process, that even on a surprise basis, something may happen out there that you have to be agile and ready to jump into on a moment's notice with this FedRAMP process. So the value add beyond what say an AWS or other entity is that Bethesda can bring to the table is that close partnership with an entity to support them on a long-term basis on what the JAB and GSA require ongoing.
Perfect addition there, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff and Jim. I don't think we have any additional questions that have come through. So I just want to thank you guys for speaking today and all of the participants for joining us. Like I said, Catalina King's information and Jim's information is on the screen. So feel free to reach out to either of them if you have any additional questions that you think of after you log off today. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, and appreciate everybody attending. Thank you.